With tensions raising around the world, the question is being asked more often: if or when will World War III happen? The tensions between the Ukraine war, the conflict in the Middle East, the tensions in East Asia, they're all contributing to the global tensions. I mean, it's a lot of tensions, right? And so today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where World War III happens in 2025 or 2024. And so let's get started. As I've already said, there are three major points of conflict in the world right now, those being the Middle East, Ukraine, and over in East Asia, mostly between China and Taiwan. Then of course there's the Korean Peninsula, and there's just a lot of other stuff going on. But overall, tensions are pretty high in Eurasia, this kind of area. Now, of course, stuff going on in Africa and South America, but I don't know if those would really start a global conflict. But with the US now allowing Ukraine to send more missiles, and they're even sending their personnel over to Ukraine, tensions are a lot higher between Russia and the West. So obviously we're going to have to color in Russia and Ukraine. We also color in North Korea because they're now sending troops over there. I'm not actually sure if North Korea has declared war in Ukraine. I'm pretty sure they haven't, but they might as well have. And it'd be the same thing as Belarus, because at the beginning of the war they gave Russia military access, so they were able to go through their territory and invade Ukraine. But I don't think it's actually going to be the Ukraine war that draws the United States in. Another likely scenario that could draw the Western allies in is the Israel conflict. When Palestine started to attack them, then Israel just has kind of gone crazy. They're invading Lebanon, and I think they pushed into Syria too, but I'll color them in. And they're now at war with Iran. There's a lot of articles circulating around about how Iran is developing nukes. I don't know how true this is, but if Iran were to use nukes on Israel, then the US would definitely get involved in this war. But another conflict that hasn't actually started in the conventional sense would be the China-Taiwan war, which they're not actually at war, but tensions have been escalating in this region for the last couple of years, right? And if China invaded Taiwan, the US would likely come to their aid. We would also probably see the Philippines join in on this, as they support Taiwan, and they also have a lot of disputes over China. They also have a lot of disputes with China in the South China Sea. And once all this gets kicked off, then we'd also see Japan, South Korea join. And with that, we'd see North Korea join, and once North Korea joins, then we would see Russia join because they have a defensive pact. That's the whole reason why North Korea is in Ukraine. And then we'd probably see the US get involved in Israel or something if Iran started developing nukes, which they might be. I don't know. I'm not saying they are. But let's say they are, and so now we've got something that looks like this. But now the US is going to go ahead and they're going to call in a lot of their allies because now they're at war with them. So I'm just going to go color in NATO, and I'll be right back. Okay, and so here is NATO, and now that all these countries have declared war on Russia, Russia's going to likely call in a lot of their allies from the CSTO, which is basically just their own version of NATO. But it's some of these Central Asian countries, but they're not really going to contribute anything because there's literally nobody even there. But with this, we'd probably see Georgia and Azerbaijan join as well. And I can't remember if Armenia is in the CSTO anymore. I'm pretty sure they left, but I'm going to put them in because of their wars and disputes with Azerbaijan. I know they're not at war or anything. And I'm also gonna actually add in Cyprus because of their disputes with Turkey. Yeah. But then Kosovo joins this war, and now this is going to be controversial because Kosovo is not a recognized country, but they are fully independent from Serbia. But this will bring Serbia into the war, and that's not really a good thing. For Serbia, but I mean, yeah. Elsewhere, we'd see Australia and New Zealand join, and over in the Americas, we could see Venezuela join and Colombia. Same with Guyana. these three countries don't like each other. We might even see Panama join that too. And maybe Cuba? Not really sure. Venezuela and Cuba would definitely be supporting Russia and China, but I don't know if they would actually join this war. But they will, because I said so. Another conflict that could happen is Egypt and Ethiopia. Egypt, Eritrea, and Somaliland signed like an anti-Ethiopia pact a couple months ago, I'm pretty sure. And so, why not? Just why not? But the reason I have them red and them blue is because a lot of the U.S. allies are in the Central African Republic, which is closely allied to Ethiopia. And it also includes South Sudan, which does not like Sudan, which is a lot closer to Egypt, and they're actually going to join this war because of, well, South Sudan and Ethiopia. We would also likely see Yemen join, and that would just kick off the rest of the Middle East, which we're already contemplating joining. I'm actually going to leave Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, and Qatar out of this, well, as well as Bahrain, but they're barely even there. I'm going to leave them out of this because it's not in their interest to go to war. They're not that strong. I mean, none of these countries are really that strong except for like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran, and Israel. But it's just kind of common interest, right? I think that's really going to be it to start the war. I might show some support countries later on, but let's just get started with the fighting. Now, at the time of recording this video, this is mostly what Russia's occupations look like in Ukraine. I know Ukraine has a little bit of land in Russia, but it's not that big, so... But it's still there. But now that Russia is at war with a lot of countries, but they also have a lot more countries on their side, they're going to kind of work with Iran in order to push into the Caucasus region, which they do so successfully, pushing into Azerbaijan and quickly taking over their capital, and pushing down into Georgia and taking over their capital. I know there's mountains here, but just for the pace of the video, I'm going to speed it up a bit. And with that, they begin to push into Turkey. Israel has already taken out Palestine and pushed into southern Lebanon as well as Syria. Turkey has northern Cyprus, but they just took out the rest of Cyprus to get it over with. And they begin to push into Syria, taking over this major city, and pushing down the coast and eventually taking over their capital. Eventually, Syria falls, and the Middle Eastern countries begin to push into Egypt, which Israel could just take this in 6 days, but they have Saudi Arabia, and they do in 5 days. Yemen really stands no chance. I mean, they're pretty much surrounded, so their capital is taken, and within a matter of days, they're wiped out of this war. And farther down south, Somaliland actually breaks away from Somalia, and they join up with the East African Federation, which has begun to push into Eritrea. Over the Americas, well, America takes out Cuba. They also take out Venezuela, pushing in, sticking to along the coast, but eventually taking over their capital, and the country capitulates. Now you might be wondering why Brazil isn't joining this war, but if you remember about BRICS, which is between Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and Russia, well, and a bunch of other countries that joined over the past year or two, but those are the main countries. And Brazil doesn't want to ruin their relations with China or Russia by joining the western side. They also don't want to ruin their relations with India or South Africa by joining the red side. I'm also not saying that South Africa and India are on the blue side or the red side. I'm just saying they all kind of want to stay neutral, just to protect their relations. But if the red team begins to invade America and they look like they're going to win the war, then we could see some more countries joining on the red team. But for now, American troops are being sent over to Africa and into Asia in order to fight the bigger powers. The Americans also make a landing in Siberia, taking over what's on this side of the map. And they begin to spill over a little bit, but not too much. Lots of naval battles are happening in the South China Sea between the Philippines, the US, Taiwan, Japan, as well as South Korea. But they're mainly focused with North Korea, which they actually have been able to push into slightly but with the help of China, they are holding them back. Russia isn't really too focused on their eastern half because most of the blue team is over here in Europe, and that's where all their important stuff is too. So Japan has a bit of an easier time pushing up and taking over these islands and making some more landings. They also make a landing in southeastern Russia and begin to take over a lot of land, which is not good for Russia. Back over in Europe, Russia has actually made gains against NATO, pushing into the Baltic states and back into northern Ukraine, whereas NATO has successfully taken over Serbia, which isn't really saying much, but yeah. And they also begin to push into Belarus, and they actually have taken over Kaliningrad, which is pretty surprising considering how militarized it is, but I mean, this is all of NATO. But nonetheless, they begin to push into Belarus, and eventually spearhead over, and they take over the capital city, which is a huge blow to the morale of the Belarusians, and kind of the Russians, I don't know. But Finland starts to do their stuff up north, pushing ever closer to St. Petersburg, and up into these northern regions of Russia. So far in Europe, it's looking pretty equal. But heading back down to Africa, the Middle East has just pushed over and taken over this area of Egypt, which contains Cairo and Alexandria. And they also begin to push down the Nile, which, I mean, that's literally their entire country right there. There's nothing else anywhere else because it's just desert. So once all of this is taken, the country basically surrenders, but there's probably some guerrilla warfare in the Sahara. But I mean, it's just desert. So with that, they continue to push down the Nile, and Sudan isn't that strong either. And so with the help of Ethiopia, they managed to take over all of this eastern area. But Sudan actually starts to push down into South Sudan, taking over quite a lot of land, which is quite surprising considering how much they've actually lost. But eventually their capital is taken, and they're forced to retreat, all of their troops are forced to retreat in order to protect their capital, but it's already gone, and the country surrenders. All that's left is Somalia, but they actually capitulated a while ago, so yeah. But now all these countries are now going up in order to fight Iran, which will be a much bigger task than fighting these countries. Now, I'm probably not going to use nuclear bombs, but if a World War III were to happen, it is likely that nuclear bombs will be used. I really hope they're not, but who's to say? They very well will be. They very well might be used. I don't know. I really hope not. And I think the rest of the world believes that as well. But anyway, Russia and Iran continue to push down into Turkey, now meeting up with most of their troops, which were just invading Syria. And a stalemate has now formed in this eastern Turkey area, kind of along this river here, if you guys can see that. Back over to East Asia, nothing has really changed. But the Chinese Navy is growing thinner and thinner as the US keeps destroying more ships. But I mean, this isn't just the US, it's Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And Taiwan is a total fortress, like, they're not penetrating that. But eventually the US is actually able to grab this island from China, but that is all. But with the help of American troops, South Korea actually sees success in pushing well over the border of North Korea, even capturing Pyongyang, and continuing to push through the country, eventually capitulating it. Now this is huge for the blue team, as they even go in and capture Shenyang? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. This Chinese major city, and even pushing into southern Russia, as they now spearhead towards this one, Changchun. However you pronounce that in Chinese, I don't know, I don't speak that language. But And eventually they meet up with Japan, cutting off this part of Russia from the coastline, and eventually just taking it because there's nobody else here guarding it. And they have taken over a large area of eastern Russia with almost no resistance. Now, this is 2025 or 2024. I don't know how soon this is happening, but I'm estimating the next year for this scenario here. But lots of missiles are being used. Obviously, Russia, North Korea, I mean, not anymore, but South Korea, Japan, China, they're launching missiles back and forth to each other. So eventually enough missiles are launched over here for them to take the city. And yeah, it's not going that good for China anymore. The US has made a landing down in the south near Hong Kong, and they've actually pushed up and taken over this city. Now obviously this isn't happening as fast as I'm showing it. I just can't fit a decade's worth of war into one video without showing it sped up. So back over in the Middle East, we actually see Turkey and the rest of NATO pushing back against Iran. And we even see the Middle Eastern countries attempt a naval invasion of Iran, which goes so kind of successfully. They are stalemated here, and they didn't capture any cities. Well, I'm sure there's some cities here, but nothing too major, because the most major cities are shown on the map. So, as the US continues to gain more and more land, taking over a lot of cities over here. I just realized how many cities are actually over here. Right, this is a lot of cities. This is probably the most cities anywhere on the map, except for like India here. I don't mean in total number, I just mean in like density of cities. But the blue team is seeing a lot of success in capturing all of these cities, and China is not doing too good. And eventually we actually see some rebel groups that are blue team leaning break out of China. We have Tibet, one northeastern China, one northwestern China, and one over by Mongolia. Very quickly they were able to take out all of Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, I can't remember, and connect up and take over a good chunk of China. Now all that's left is their more highly populated areas. I know a lot of their highly populated areas are already taken, but a lot of these people are just surrendering, or they're not even in the military. They're just welcoming the West with open arms. I don't really know how things would be going here, but it's not going good for China, I can tell you that. Back over in Europe, Finland has taken over a lot of northern Russia, and Russia has made slight advances into Estonia, but nothing too significant. Same within Latvia or Lithuania. I'm pretty sure it's Latvia. But St. Petersburg is taken by Finland, and this is a huge blow to Russia, as this is one of their only warm water ports. But I mean, again, it's still restricted by NATO because Denmark and Baltic Sea and stuff. And so NATO probably wants to get a peace treaty almost as soon as possible. As soon as they can push back Russia, basically just back into their territory. And then take back all of Turkey and Georgia and maybe even Azerbaijan. And they're almost done in China. So once they've got all that, then they're likely to be able to get a peace treaty. We also see Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan surrender because they see absolutely no point to this war. Because, I mean, why even go to war? Like, it's just kind of silly. But they just leave the war and they'll have some land taken from them in peace treaty. They don't care. They just don't want their countries destroyed. The rest of these countries are kind of the main players of this axis, if you will. I mean, obviously not Armenia or Belarus, but like, you know what I mean. Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea, but they're kind of gone now. Those are kind of the main players here. But with a lot of their countries gone and their troops losing morale, NATO is able to have a much easier time pushing back against Russia, and they eventually liberate Estonia and the rest of the Baltic countries, and eventually Belarus surrenders, and a much broader front into Russia is opened, northern Ukraine is liberated, and they start to push back against Russia in the south. But they are definitely closing in on Moscow, and as soon as they capture Moscow, they can pretty much end the war. Back down in the Middle East, Turkey is able to push back against Iran and Russia, even pushing up into Georgia slightly, and touching the border of Armenia, which they will cross over into, but just barely. And it is now that we see the total collapse of a lot of these red team countries. The United States and Japan fully take control over eastern Siberia. I mean, not really fully take control, but take most control. Like, they have moved the troops through, like, all of this area. So, like, we could just color that in. Obviously, there's not troops in every inch of this cold wasteland, but you get what I'm saying. And once the West takes over a lot of other major cities, China actually ends up surrendering. Now, they would probably use nuclear bombs there, but I don't want to do that because that would kind of ruin the video. Or would it? No, it probably would. But the West continues to push through, gaining aid from a lot of other countries from around the world. Eventually, their push into Iran is a lot more successful. They take over all of Armenia, and they begin to push into southern Russia. Not before liberating all the Caucasus countries first. And we actually see Iran surrender now. Or, they didn't really surrender, they capitulated because the US invaded them, but whatever. Ukraine is actually liberated, and they take over all of southern Russia. And now, we've come to the Battle of Moscow. NATO troops are right on the border of the city, and they push around attempting to surround it. And, I mean, this is going pretty successfully. But eventually, after tons and tons and tons of missiles, the city is taken. And that will likely mark the end of the war since, well, Russia's kind of gone. And so now, let's go take a look at this massive peace treaty for a possible World War III. Okay, and so here is our peace treaty. Let's start over here in Americas, where there's pretty much nothing that happened. But Cuba is pretty much turned into a U.S. state. Same with Puerto Rico, because they're already U.S. controlled, but since the state's right here, so why not make them a state? And Colombia and Guyana get to land on Venezuela, and Venezuela is probably heavily monitored by the U.S., so I could probably just color them blue. Going back over to Africa, a lot of countries are beginning to unionize after the war, just because of the effects, and they're also beginning to form the East African Federation. Somaliland is released. South Sudan and Egypt are not doing very good, and they're probably going to unite. Yemen is split between Saudi Arabia and Oman. Israel gains land out of all neighboring nations. Turkey gains Cyprus. Kosovo gains full independence, and Serbia has a new government and joins NATO. Ukraine is finally allowed to join NATO, same with Azerbaijan and Georgia, who took a lot of land out of Iran and Russia. And Iran is now, well, occupied by the US. Ukraine gains a ton of land out of Russia. And if they want to invade them again, well, they're right next to Moscow. But Russia is also now controlled and divided up by the US and Western allies into multiple different republics. All the Baltic states and Poland got new borders, and Finland expanded a lot into northern Russia. Over in East Asia, Japan has expanded into mainland Russia and Siberia, gaining all these islands. And the Korean Peninsula is united once again, and China is divided up. There's a new Western China, Tibet, and then just China, but this will probably be divided even more into Central China, Manchuria, and then just coastal China, which will probably be very pro-Western, as a lot of these other new countries will be. And so that's going to be it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you enjoyed, all the support is greatly appreciated as we try to reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of this year. All the support is greatly appreciated and helps out a lot. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.